Thank you, Lou, our featured panelist. Your perspectives and insights into farmers' future in the Palmetto State are a great way to begin our conversation today. I'm Erin Ford, Vice President of SCbio. We are grateful for all of you in attendance today, our partners, our board members, sponsors, our members at large, and those of you that we're just getting to know this week. It's an exciting time for us. I'm also excited to announce something new, our inaugural Pinnacle and Hall of Fame Awards. On behalf of South Carolina's life sciences industry, SCbio is introducing the inaugural South Carolina Life Sciences Pinnacle Awards, annually recognizing one individual and one organization that have made an extraordinary impact on the growth, advancement, and contributions of the state's life science industry to our state, to our nation, and the world. The Pinnacle Award for Individual Contribution will recognize individuals whose industry-related efforts have resulted in broad economic, innovation, social, and quality of life benefits profoundly and positively impacting our industry, and one that will likely be felt in years to come. The Pinnacle Award for Organizational Contribution will honor an organization whose performance over time has resulted in inspirational leadership, industry support, advancement, consistent innovation, benefiting employees, the industry, in our state, and beyond as well. The Hall of Fame Awards, they will periodically recognize an individual. We're not just going to give it out every year. This one's a special one. They all are. Extraordinary and notable achievements over an extended period of time in developing, transforming South Carolina's life science industry. The individual will demonstrate courageous thinking and action, vision, leadership, and much more. Our first award today is the Pinnacle Award for Individual Contribution. Presenting this award, SCbio Vice Chairman Craig Walker, General Manager of Hitachi Healthcare. Craig.
I'm quite honored to present the 2018 South Carolina Life Sciences Pinnacle Award for Individual Contributions. This year's recipient is a South Carolina native from Columbia, whose research and inventions have helped save millions of lives, as well as become the standard for capacitors in today's defibrillators. In many respects, he's a modern Renaissance man, as he's helped lead South Carolina's SC Launch program in helping promote and finance startups, as well as be involved in economic development in his local community. He's a huge patron of the arts. In his personal time, when he has it, he actually spends time renovating and restoring antique pianos and clavichords. In this past spring, he opened the Carolina Music Museum to house the bulk of this impressive collection. He's an author, a mentor, and an inspiring leader at St. Jude's Medical. In addition to all of these many accomplishments, he's also one of the founding members of this organization. Please join me in recognizing this year's 2018 SC Life Sciences Pinnacle Award recipient for individual contribution, Mr. Tom Strange.
If I was just another dusty record on the shelf, would you blow me off and play me like everybody?
Tom, would you mind saying a few comments?
Well, I will. First of all, as a per pound award goes, this has got to be one of the greatest awards that I've ever gotten. So guys, it always sounds great on paper, but it was all, step after step after step. We had a need, we saw a need, we filled the need. When we were looking around to start a company, we chose Pickens because I could get square footage for almost nothing. We had all of downtown Liberty as our manufacturing, and we would take the little product out on the sidewalk and go down, and that was the work in process down the sidewalk. We are now Abbott. We are delighted to be Abbott. We started off as Little Maven Capacitor, then on to Venturetex, then on to St. Jude Medical, now Abbott. We're making all the internal components for the pacemakers and implantable defibrillators. And Liberty has become a real growth area for the company. Why? Because we get it. We get it here in South Carolina. We know what it takes. We have a great work ethic. We have a great quality of life. It's an easy sell. When we were looking around, Steve Johnson and I were looking around and we're going, we need representation. What's the next thing that our businesses need? Well, there was a little SCbio that wasn't doing anything, and so we kind of co-opted the name, and we said, let's go make SCbio. And I got to tell you that, in the first days, the board was us. And as you would look around, who is interested in this? Well, we got to build the value proposition. So we have built the value proposition. Guys, look around at all the people who said, this has value to me in 10 short years. So my challenge to this group is very simple. Find a need, add a little imagination, go make something happen. Every one of you has the ability and has the responsibility to earn one of these. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm J.J. Darby. I'm Director of State Government Affairs with Johnson & Johnson, and I also serve on SCbio's board. I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Jim Greenwood, this morning. Jim has a list of accomplishments as long as your arm, but for the interest of time. As president of BIO, Jim represents over 1,000 biotechnology companies, academic institutions, state biotechnology centers, and related organizations across the U.S. and in 30 countries. Jim represented Pennsylvania's 8th District in the Congress from '93 to 2005, where he was a senior member of the Energy and Commerce Committee and was widely seen as a leader on healthcare and the environment. Jim served 6 years in the South Carolina General Assembly and in the Pennsylvania Senate. Pennsylvania? Did I say Pennsylvania? I'm sorry. He also holds a BA in sociology from Dickinson. So before we welcome him to the stage, let's take a look at a short video to remind us of why we're here today.
We think of time as a one-way motion, from the past, through the present, and on into the future. Let us suppose that the past is the result of the present.
Another decade with a spouse. A few more years with your best friend. A rich, full life rather than one cut short. How do we place value on these? Today's breakthroughs in biopharmaceutical medicines are delivering more than stunning outcomes, more than cures. They are giving us hope. They are giving us time. Time. What is more precious? Priceless. And what better reason to push forward the cures we see so close at hand?
Great video. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in joining Jim Greenwood. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. So before I get officially started, any Carolina Panther fans in the room? Y'all got lucky last Sunday. Beat the Eagles. We're down. I'm from Philadelphia area, so yeah, go Eagles. All right. We were down. We were up 17-0 in the fourth quarter, and they came back and killed us. It was amazing. Second thing I want to say is thanks to Sam and the whole team, Erwin and Patrick and the rest of them. I met Sam a little over a year ago when he started. He came into my office and full of energy, and I said, well, we'll see what this guy does. And talk about a surge. He has rebuilt this organization, and it's been a great thing to see. And not only that, what a great partner you all are with us at BIO, because you've at the convention, I'll talk a little bit about our international convention, but something like 40 people you brought up to that. Every time we have an advocacy issue, either here or most severely in Washington, you and your team are right there on the job working with your delegation. So I want to thank you for being such a great partner. You really are. So I'm supposed to have the clicker here. I'm in your shoes. There we go. So let's see what we have here. Okay, so there I am with a couple of my BFFs. I'll tell you a story about this. I want to talk to you a little bit, do a commercial about our convention, but it's more than a commercial. It really has a lot to do, I think, with how you all can help yourselves to grow a biocenter here in South Carolina. But I did have, at one of our conventions, international conventions, I did have former Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush to interview in front of 5,000 people for an hour. And I admit, even though I had served in Congress with both of them and knew them personally, still a little nervous. And I would say to myself, come on, Greenwood, you've done this 100 times. And then I would say, no, you haven't. It's two presidents at the same time. Nobody's done this before. So I decided I needed a humorous line to kind of relax myself when I started. So I started thinking came up with one I thought was pretty good, and I ran it by my daughter, who was, I think, 25 at the time. She said, Daddy, whatever you do not use that line. So, of course, I did. So there we are at the convention. It's a very highly produced thing. So the three of us in the green room chatting, and the guy with the headphones comes back, and he says, gentlemen, 30 seconds. So the three of us go to the back of the stage, and the voice of God says, ladies and gentlemen, the President and CEO of Bio, the Honorable Jim Greenwood. And I come out, and lights and music. And ladies and gentlemen, former Presidents William Jefferson Clinton and George W. Bush, and lights and music, and they come out. And so we all sit down, and I say, what an incredible moment this is for us at Bio, to have on our stage at the same time, not just one, not just two, but three presidents. It worked. But later, Bush kept calling Clinton President Clinton, and Clinton kept calling Bush George. So finally, Clinton says, just call me Bill. And George says, okay, call me George. And I said, well, I'd still prefer if you gentlemen refer to me as Mr. President. So anyway, some of you are very familiar with Bio, and some of you may not be, so I just want to give you a little bit about the organization that I have the honor to run. We represent about 1,000 companies. Most of them, about 85%, are in the drug discovery business. Basically, all of the big 40 or so pharma companies that are also members of Pharma Capital P, but equally, if not more important, hundreds and hundreds of startups, small companies all over the country that are in the early stages of development and clinical trials. We also represent the food and agricultural side of biotechnology, so the GMO seed makers and transgenic salmon producers and animal cloners and that kind of thing, and the agricultural side, the plant side of biotech, which is now really advancing with gene editing and all of the rest. We also represent the biofuels companies and the biomaterials companies who are making those kinds of products out of sustainable plant material as opposed to oil and gas and coal. And we also represent companies that make countermeasures, medical countermeasures to bioterror events. So it's a broad array of biotechnology. And what we do for them is essentially two things. We develop policy that's advantageous that gives advantage to innovation, and we lobby for that in Washington and before the Congress and the executive branch and all the 50 states, including South Carolina, and around the world. And we also oppose and work hard against policies that are not conducive to the success of innovation. The other thing we do is we convene meetings around the world. We have our annual convention that has drawn up to 22,000 people this year, about 18,000. And we do meetings, partnering and business-to-business meetings in New York and in San Francisco, and twice a year in Europe and in China and Japan and in South America. This year's convention was a good one for us. We drew something like over 18,000 people. We put on 46,000 plus, almost 47,000 one-on-one meetings in the course of a couple days. And so if you haven't been there and you're looking for partners, you're looking for investors, you really ought to come. Because what you do is, in the run-up to the convention, you go into our database and you can search other people who want to do partnering meetings. You can search them by company, you can search them by disease, I think you can search them by molecule, and ask them if they'd like to do a 30-minute meeting with you at the convention, and if they do, we schedule it and route it. And it saves a whole lot of jet fuel. It is a great way to network and to meet new potential partners, and so I really encourage you to be there. especially if you're small companies, and that really goes to the point I just made. It is a great place for small companies who are looking for partners, and many times small companies are getting to the point, obviously, where they're ready to do phase 3 clinical trials, or they're ready to go to market, they're ready to commercialize, and they don't have the capacity to do that, but the larger companies do, and it's a great place to make those kinds of arrangements and deals. We have some great times at these events, so it's not just all business and exhibiting, but we have interesting people to interview. This year I had the pleasure to interview Robin Roberts and Rob Reiner, two fascinating people, and we had one Diana Ross lead a heck of a party for us, and then we meet with government officials like Scott Gottlieb as well. So one of the things we did, this was our 25th year, and so we're sort of celebrating the last 25 years of biotechnology, and we had the opportunity to bring a young woman whose name is Ashanti De Silva up. She was the very first person to ever receive gene therapy successfully. She had this disease called SCID, where the body is completely incapable of making any immune response, the so-called bubble boy syndrome. And so she didn't have much of a prospect. Children with those diseases just didn't live. But her parents were both scientists, and they were willing to try her in a very innovative new trial, and it worked. And here it is, something like 28 years later. She gets these shots, I think, every 2 months or so, and she's perfectly healthy, and she's now she's now a patient advocate. Gene therapy goes back in theory into the early 70s, and it was tried in the 80s, but there were a number of failures, including one at the University of Pennsylvania where Jesse Geisinger, a young man, died, and it kind of set the whole idea of gene therapy back for quite a while. But it's on the move now. This year, the FDA approved 3 new gene therapies. One of them is for a rare eye condition, and it's an amazing thing. I saw a video of a young boy who really couldn't see. They had a little maze for him to walk through where they had pieces of cardboard hanging down on strings. And he would just bang into all of them because he couldn't see at all. And they injected these genes into the back of his eyes, and he sees perfectly well now. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. And they're treating a number of kids with this disease now with gene therapy. But FDA has 81 gene therapies under review right now, and 46 CAR T medicines, or in the pipeline, I should say. So gene therapy is here to stay, and it's an amazingly exciting time for us in science. This is an advertisement to come to Philadelphia. This is the theme for our Philadelphia convention, which will be in early June. It starts with one. What I mean by that is it starts with one idea, one scientist, one company, one thought, and it leads to unbelievable miracles for the future. This entire enterprise depends upon 2 sectors. The private sector in the U.S., where we have incredible scientists, we have incredible entrepreneurs who are willing to take risks, and not all cultures are like that. You know, a lot of the Asian cultures, failure is almost fatal in terms of losing face. In the U.S., entrepreneurs are used to starting a company, failing, starting another company, and never feel any shame in it, but to get more invigorated until they ultimately succeed. We have great universities. But all of this depends, and we have investors who are also willing to risk it all, and they know they're going to lose all of their money 9 times out of 10 investing in biotech companies, but they'll make it back on the 10th one if the policy is right. But it also depends upon the government sector, the public sector, and that means we have to have a regulatory system and a reimbursement system and investment in research to interplay with the private sector and make this enterprise work. So that is why I always say you can have the best scientists in the world, you can have the best entrepreneurs in the world, you can have the best and smartest and savvy investors in the world, but if the policy environment is not conducive to success, we can't succeed. And it's as simple as that. So that's why we work with SCbio and the affiliates around the country to make sure that the policy at the state level and the federal level is conducive to success and not having the effect of thwarting innovation. And I'll tell you, it's a really challenging time right now. There's nothing new about people complaining about drug prices. I showed this a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, to my board to say you can go back to the 19th century and see people complaining about the price of drugs. So that's not new. But what is new is the intensity. This has moved from people complaining about the price of drugs to vilifying us, vilifying the drug makers as if we're the bad guys, that we're the greedy big pharma companies that, as some will vocalize it, they'll say, well, you know, the NIH does all the research, and then the biotech companies and the pharma companies come along and they get that information and they tweak it a little bit, and then they jack the price way up, create these ridiculous prices, and gouge little old ladies so they can't have their medicine. Nothing could be farther from the truth, but that's the world in which we live right now. And there are reasons that why it is that people think these ways. What has really, and I'll get to this in some detail, what's really not changed, the pricing on average hasn't really changed. That's not what has changed historically. What's changed is what comes out of people's pockets. And that's been a function of the way the insurance industry has evolved more than it is about the way the drug industry has evolved. As insurers have tried to reduce their costs and increase their profits, they have looked to create higher and higher deductibles, particularly in the world of prescription and in their prescription drug plans, which makes no sense. When you think about a deductible and what its purpose is, I have like a $500 deductible on my comprehensive car insurance. And that's a good thing because I have a tendency to back into concrete pillars in parking garages. And I can't go take my car to the body shop every time I do that. But when you think about having a deductible on a prescription drug, what value does it serve, right? Nobody says, give me an extra handful of chemotherapy pills because I don't have to pay anything out of pocket, right? There's sometimes where maybe going from choosing between a generic and a brand, if they're equally, therapeutically equal, or a biosimilar and a biologic under certain circumstances, where maybe having some skin in the game financially would make a reasonable difference. But for the most part, when you have a deductible, what it does is it destroys the ability of the patient to gain access. And so people, and it's been shown that even a $50 or $100 copay can make the difference between whether a patient will take even a cancer drug or not. So it destroys adherence, and all it does in the long run, really, is cost the healthcare system more. Because when these patients don't have the access to and affordable access to the medicines they need, what happens? They end up in the hospital. They end up costing the healthcare system more. And one of the things that is confounding is that in a lot of insurance companies, you have a team that works on the prescription drug side, and you have a team that works on the hospital side. So the prescription drugs guys, they get rewarded by reducing spending on prescription drugs. And so they have all of these mechanisms they use to dissuade people from getting access to drugs or having to pay unreasonable out-of-pocket. They are probably costing the hospital side of the health plan more money, but they're not talking to each other, and they're not benefiting from each other's activities. So as you can see, if you can see, the chart on the left here shows drug pricing over time. And what you had that big spike, and that spike is Sovaldi. So when Gilead first came out with Sovaldi, which was a miracle drug, cures hepatitis C. Up until that point, there was some drugs you could take, but people didn't stay with them because they had awful side effects. And there was really no cure for hepatitis C. So people not only they suffered, they were disabled, they couldn't work, they had to have very expensive hospitalizations and liver transplantations. They were giving it to each other because it is transmitted through needle sharing and sex. And so it was a very, very costly social health problem. So Sovaldi comes out, and you take one pill a day for 12 weeks, and you're cured. And it's a miracle. But it was very expensive. Soon, competition came in from AbbVie and others, and the price came down, and things leveled off again. But it was that spike that really heated up the rhetoric about drug pricing. But we have to remember that we're not the problem when it comes to what's driving insurance costs up. It's hospitals are where the money is, and doctors is where the money is. So we're that 17% of the light blue That's the portion of the total healthcare spend that we represent. And yet when you think about what the politicians talk about in terms of trying to save the healthcare system money and reduce premiums, they always seem to focus on the drug industry. And I think there are some reasons for that have to do with politics. One of them is every member of Congress has hospitals in their district. And when I was in Congress a couple times a year, or several times a year, I'd put on my tuxedo and go to a hospital ball and sit with the trustees of the hospital, and they'd tell me they'd like to throw me a fundraiser or something like that. Everybody has doctors in their districts, but our industry is not equally geographically distributed. So it's focused in big places like Boston, San Francisco, and elsewhere. But so there are a lot of members of Congress in both the House and the Senate who really don't have much in the way of the biopharmaceutical industry in their district. So it's easier to vote to cut our spending and to attack us than it is to attack the rest of the healthcare system. Despite the fact that we get accused of having these high margins, the reality is that our industry puts more of its profit back into R&D than any other sector in the nation. We have to, and in the economy. We have to. That's the way the system works. And the system as it works in terms of pricing is really ingenious because you have Hatch-Waxman, and so you get your patent, you get some data exclusivity depending upon how long it took you to get your product through the FDA, and then you can recover your money, pay your investors, and plow more back into the next product line, and then it goes generic, and then it's low price essentially forever. And so you're contributing to the store of drugs and medicines in the nation and the world for future generations to have. But you need that. The social contract is you need to have that period in which you can recover your costs and get new money to invest. Because we are essentially the last place in the world where we have something close to a free market, where we can set our own prices and we don't have heavy-handed price controls. Because of that, we innovate 57% of all of the drugs in the world, so more than the rest of the world combined. And the fact of the matter is the drugs that are innovated in Europe and Asia are largely innovated for our market because they know it is in our market that they can recover their costs and continue to attract investment in their countries and in their continents. So if the Congress or the state or the states and the president make the wrong moves and impose policies that will drive investors away from our industry, because as you all know, investors are not investing necessarily because they want to treat diseases. They're investing because they're looking for return on that investment. And if they can't get the return on this highly risky enterprise where 90+% of all clinical trials fail, they can easily take their money and invest it in information technology or real estate or any other commodity they want. And when we see even tweets about price controls, we see the biopharmaceutical markets decline, and it takes a while for them to recover. So the investors are very sensitive to what's going on in the policy world. So President Trump campaigned in 2016. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders were busy beating the drum about drug pricing, and Donald Trump thought that was he could see. His instincts are good on these things. He could see there was a good issue on which to run, and so he did. And one of the very first things he did after his election was to hold a press conference and say, pharmaceutical companies are getting away with murder, and I'm going to get prices way, way down. And so he's been really insistent on having his administration do that. Alex Azar is, the interesting thing was that after all of his rhetoric about how bad the pharmaceutical companies are, when it came time for him to select his Secretary for Health and Human Services, he selected Alex Azar from Lilly, high-level executive at Lilly, who was on my board and co-chaired my reimbursement committee, and was very, very, very adamant about being market-based. So the president, nonetheless, nominated and appointed him. That's a very good thing. He also nominated Scott Gottlieb, who was confirmed to head the FDA. Terrific guy. We're delighted that he's there. Really smart guy, understands our industry. So these guys understand our industry, but as soon as Azar was nominated, the critics started screaming that, look, the president says he's going to go get the drug companies, and what's he do? He puts the fox in the hen house there. And so I think understandably, Alex Azar had to really ratchet up his rhetoric and to let his critics know and let the senators whose confirmation he sought that he was not going to be the tool of the industry. He had one job, now he has another job, and he's going to behave accordingly. And so, but nonetheless, when those critics complained and hit back at the president and others in his administration felt that they really had to up their rhetoric, and they did. These are some quotes, and I don't have to go through all of these, but suffice it to say. And what happens is we talk to these people in the administration, and they understand our industry, and they understand what kind of policy is necessary for innovation to succeed, and they understand what kind of policy will kill innovation, but they also will tell us, sort of on this side, but every time I see the president, all he says is, what are you going to do about getting drug prices down? So they are under tremendous pressure to try to figure out how they can thread the needle to use, in an ideal world, to use a competitive marketplace to control pricing rather than policies that will be distorting the economics and harming, interfering with the ability or the willingness of investors to invest. One of the policies that the administration just announced, and it will take place beginning in January 1st, is that they're doing step therapy for Part B, the Part B Medicare program. So for those of you who are not expert on this, Part D is basically the small molecule reimbursement program for the Medicare prescription drug benefit. Part B is for the injectables, the biologics, and so forth. And up until, and President Obama had said that you can't use step therapy or fail first measures within that program. So if your doctor says to a patient, this is the injectable drug that I want to use for you, that is best for your health, that was that. And the private insurers who administer, the way that the Medicare Part D program works is insurers market their prescription drug plans, and then the Medicare program subsidizes the premium. And so those companies were not allowed to require patients to fail on older, less expensive drugs first. The administration just changed that, and they said that they may do that now. We think that's terrible policy, because there's a lot of experience that physicians have had where they've seen that based on the diagnostics of the patient, other characteristics of the patient, sometimes even the genotype of the patient, and they know that this is the drug that is most likely to relieve suffering and provide some relief for the disease. And the idea that patients would have to first start on a less expensive, older version of the drug, continue to suffer, maybe have his or her life at risk during that time, and then fail, and then come back, and maybe fail on another drug and come back before they can get the drug that the doctor actually thought they should have, is really just an atrocious policy. And my staff and I went over and talked to some of the leaders at the HHS just a day before yesterday to make the point that if this program doesn't have some guardrails to protect the patients, we really have to oppose it, and patient groups will oppose it strenuously as well. A couple of things that are very positive. The president did scrap NAFTA. I was there when we adopted NAFTA. We thought it was good policy to open up the trade between Canada and U.S. and Mexico. The president thought otherwise, and I have to give him credit. When it came to biologics and data exclusivity, that is, when a biologic is approved at the FDA, how many years do they have before another company may come along with a biologic using the clinical data of the innovator and apply for approval? In Mexico, that was 0, and I think in Canada it was 8 years, and Trump's negotiators got that up to 10 years in both places. So that is a good thing. I have to give the president credit for that. And he also did some good in other elements of the trade pact, particularly with regard to dairy farmers. Somebody said, well, maybe you shouldn't elect a bully for president. Somebody else said, yeah, but he just stole Canada's milk money, so maybe it's working. That was a joke. Another thing that has been very positive for us, and I give my team a whole lot of credit for it, the opioid crisis, of course, is horrific. Most of us, including myself, have someone in their extended family who has suffered and continues to suffer from opioid addiction. And when Congress was trying to do things about it, they tended to look at things like law enforcement, how do you prevent the drugs from getting into the U.S. To begin with. The fact of the matter is you can't. The situation is no longer one where tractor trailers are driving heroin up from Mexican. It's where Chinese folks are FedExing shoeboxes full of fentanyl into the U.S. And so the process, the idea that you can just keep it out is not going to work. So we went to the Hill, to the administration, and said, look, the long-run cure for this scourge is innovation. And what we need is new painkillers that are non-addictive, and we can do that. And we're making some of those products. They're not non-opioid. We need better medically assisted treatment products, so drugs and medicines that can be used to treat someone who has been addicted. So instead of giving them something else that triggers the opioid reactors, we actually have drugs like Vivitrol that sit on the opioid receptors, so that when an addict shoots up again, they don't get high, and so they eventually don't bother. But the fact of the matter is that no one will invest in these new innovative products, which are the answer to the opioid crisis, unless FDA is going to approve them, and the payers, public and private, are going to pay for them. And so what we did is went to the Hill and say, these are some of the policies that you're going to have to adopt if you want investment in these new innovative products that will eventually, in the longer run, end this kind of a crisis. And we succeeded. And I have a little video I want to show about our thought processes here.
We're back now with an urgent warning from the Surgeon General. He's sounding the alarm this week to doctors about the epidemic of opioid abuse in the U.S.
This is the quietest drug epidemic that we've ever had in this country. I mean, certainly in the last 50 to 60 years.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the opioid epidemic is getting worse.
The nation's growing opioid crisis needs to be solved.
We're already in the crisis. Now we have to walk back from that.
One of the things you come to appreciate working in this field and dealing with patients and their parents and their spouses and loved ones is you very quickly lose whatever belief you had going in that this is a disease of choice.
People that are suffering from addiction are human beings that are suffering from a disease.
This is not about people who are bad. I have a young lady in my extended family, 25 years old. She's been an addict for 8 years. She doesn't want to be an addict. She writes poetry that would break your heart. But she's just a regular kid that got hooked, and it's awful.
So there are multiple facets of this epidemic that we can address as the biopharmaceutical industry.
We see a lot of exciting technologies on the opioid class of medications.
There's a tremendous amount of focus on the need for developing non-addictive pain medications.
We have to identify new medicines for treating pain, and we also have to identify new medicines to help those people who are already suffering from addiction.
If we can turn the pain signal off directly at the site of a surgery, then we can think again about how we use systemic drugs, either given orally or injectably, in order to control your pain. And what the doctors are really asking us is, can we use fewer opioids?
The focus of the company has been on chronic pain, first of all, and then the second is on non-addictive, non-dependent therapies.
We are getting a deeper and deeper understanding of what causes pain and how to treat it.
One of the things we're fascinated here in our laboratories and in our clinical research is the definition of pain itself.
Innovation is at the heart of everything that all of us in the biotech community, biopharmaceutical community do.
The biotech industry has a proven track record of how we can bring innovation forward.
And the brilliant thing about some of our companies is they can innovate new products that are really good at stopping pain, but are not addictive.
That's the way that we have to go and move forward. But as an industry,
When I started in the industry, AIDS and HIV were a terrifying scourge that is now a disease that can be treated chronically.
Where we are the experts is in innovation.
This is a major problem, and we can be a major part of the solution.
Innovation in new pain products, innovation in new addiction products, but also innovation in the system itself.
We gotta get this job done because people are just suffering too much.
we are moving forward now where we haven't been able to in the last 10 years.
Unfortunately, new innovative drugs cost hundreds of millions, often billions.
There is no magic bullet, and so we need to be ready to invest in a large number of innovations that hopefully, as we add one after another of these innovations up, can make a real difference.
The biotech pharmacy industry, the medical provider sector, the patient community, all of this needs to really come together. This is a multifactorial problem.
So the insurers have to step up to the plate too. And they have to be willing to say, if this kind of a product is going to save people from addiction, we're going to pay for it. It's in their interest to pay for it.
I think that the payers have to look at innovation and help support that with regard to letting investors and the regulatory agencies and the whole group know that there is a way forward.
Because in the end, these new therapies usually ultimately cut the costs. They prevent unnecessary side effects, which then themselves require treatment.
So that's where we've chosen to focus our energies. How can we as an industry focus the collective creative energy in ways that can very quickly move the needle and address the crisis? We can do this.
I think we can beat this thing, and I think we can beat it faster than some people might think.
So when you think, what is biotechnology? In my mind, biotechnology is understanding life at the cellular level, at the genetic level, at the molecular level, in more and more profound ways, and then using that knowledge to solve human problems. And whether that problem is opioid addiction, or whether we're talking about cancer, or Parkinson's, or a host of hundreds and hundreds of rare diseases, whether we're talking about making agriculture more productive, whether they're talking about fighting terrorism, whether we're talking about making the environment cleaner, biotechnology is going to provide the answers to all of these problems. And I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that biotechnology, there isn't a disease on the face of the earth that biotechnology will not be able to treat and probably cure, because there's nothing in the science that says we can't get there. But it does take us back to policy, because that's the only thing that will stop us. You might have noticed there's an election coming up. We've been in the last 2 years in a world in which the Republicans controlled the House, and the Republicans controlled the Senate, and the Republicans controlled the White House, and still we've had a very uphill fight, as I described a little bit earlier. And we've taken some hits in terms of the policy. This is not a political statement, but the prediction is that the Democrats will take the House in this election. It's not a certainty, but it's looking that way, probably not the Senate. But that will make the climb even steeper, because Republicans tend to be more on the side of free enterprise than Democrats. We have some wonderful champions in the Democratic Party, but Nancy Pelosi and other leaders of that party have made it very clear they're coming after us. So we'll have a lot of work to do, and we're going to need your help. And then in the 2020 election, God knows what's going to happen. But if we get someone in the White House who is even less even-handed and more out to get the industry, then all of the promise I just described is really deeply at risk. So when you look at why it is that people are so mad about drug prices, I think the politicians get it wrong. And I can say this because I was a politician for 24 years. what people, I go into the halls of Congress all the time and I say to members of Congress, your constituents are not angry or upset about the price of drugs. And they say, what are you talking about? They tell me they are all the time. I said, no, what they're unhappy about is what's coming out of their pockets. And that is, we can't price our way out of that. If a drug costs $10,000 and a patient has a $3,000 deductible, we could reduce our price in half, which of course would kill investment if we reduced our prices by 50%. But that patient still has to pay that $3,000. And so constantly, you look at the news stories, you listen to the politicians, all of the time they're saying drugs cost too much, and what they're really saying is people are taking too much out of their pockets. And so we can't fix this problem unless the policymakers understand and the media understands that this is a function not only of the way drugs are priced, but of how the reimbursement system works, whether it's Medicare, Part D, where patients still have to pay $5,000 or $10,000, as much as $5,000 to $10,000 a year out of their pocket, and they can't afford it, and so they do without medicines. And I say to members of Congress all the time, you own the Medicare Part D program. I was there when we created it. And the fact of the matter was that conservative Republicans, fiscally conservative Republicans, did not want to create another entitlement. And so it was very difficult to get their votes. And so what the leadership had to do was build into that system patient so-called skin in the game and require these out-of-pocket expenses for patients so that maybe they wouldn't squander their consumption of drugs and that they would contribute to the cost. And that's a huge mistake. It was a huge mistake. It was something that was politically necessary, but it's not in the interest of patients. So the Congress needs to understand that. Congress needs to understand that they need to take a look at insurers and how they force patients to pay out of pocket. Because at the end of the day, this is a moral issue. No patient should ever have to go without a needed medication because of what is required to come out of his or her pocket. We should take that as a given, as a moral imperative to not allow that to happen. And we'll do our part. We'll come to the table and negotiate, I think, at the drop of a hat, if everyone understands that that's the imperative. That, and as long as we are defending pricing, we're going to lose. But when we're defending patients, which is what we're all about, we will win. And we need your help to do that. And in order to get your help to do that, I would like you all now to take out your cell phones. Those of you who have been emailing during my entire remarks, and I know who you are, this should be easy for you, including my staff there. If you just text for bio to 52886, I'd like you to all do that now if you haven't done it. What you'll get is a download of a lot of our talking points and materials that you can use, whether you're talking to the media, whether you're talking across the Thanksgiving table to your family who might have something to say about drug pricing. And you'll have all of the facts and figures as we've assembled them, which is critically important because a lot of the way this fight got started was you had Obamacare created, and the insurers rushed in and lowballed their premiums in order to get market share. And they realized that they had set their premiums too low and that they were going to have to raise their premiums. And so they needed a scapegoat for why they were raising their premiums, and they made a concerted effort to to blame it on drug costs. Wasn't true, but that was their campaign. That was their written campaign plan, to make it look like the reason they were raising their premiums was because of the prices of drugs. And the reason I can say that with authority is because my EVP for health used to work for the lobbyists for the health insurers, and his job was to write that plan. So now I hired him, and he's singing like a canary. So anyway, I think we can win this battle. It's an ongoing battle in Washington, in the states, and around the world. But we have to win. It's a complicated message that we have to deliver. It's so easy to say drugs cost too damn much, and it's very difficult to explain all about the risks involved in investors and the cost of producing these drugs and so forth. But we have to win this fight because otherwise the science, which is, as was mentioned, CRISPR and gene editing and Cas9, all of these new immunotherapies, gene therapy, cell therapy, these new treatments and medicines are going to change the face of the world. They're going to dramatically reduce pain and suffering and extend longevity, but only if the policy is conducive to success. And that's what we're all about at Bio, and that's what you're all about at SCbio, and thank you for doing that. And it's been a pleasure, and I think we're going to take some questions now.
Thank you, Jim. So much work has been done, so much work to still do.
Yes.
So we've got a few questions. I'm going to lead things off for you. We'll make it easy. You talked a lot about politics, so no problem.
Okay,
right?
sure.
Potentially game-changing election coming up. As you mentioned, you have a lot of experience in Congress. What is the plan that Bio intends to do to help, continue that positive message? And then for us, what can we do here in South Carolina as well?
Sure. Well, as I just said, it's a very complicated message, and it requires a lot of shoe leather, so to speak. There will be something like 100 new members of Congress out of 535 at the end of this election. So that means 100 new people, many of whom, because of the political environment surrounding our issues, campaigned on doing something about drug pricing. And so they're going to come rushing into Washington and get sworn into office, and we have to go educate every single one of them. I haven't looked closely enough to know whether you'll have new members in South Carolina or not, whether there are empty seats here or seats that are highly contested. But we have to continue constantly to educate these legislators. One of the things that we've done, initiated at Bio to do that, and it's a very challenging thing to do, but we're working on it, is a project we call Project 535. So as I said, there are 435 members of the House and 100 senators. We want to get every single one of them into a biotech company. And there's a reason for that, because of course I go up to the Hill all the time, my staff does, we have contract lobbyists who do, but when you go to meet with a member of Congress, what very frequently happens is the bells ring, meaning there's a vote, and they all go rushing off. They have lines of people coming in to see them. Their minds are spinning with all of the issues that they're trying to deal with, and they have votes and they have committee meetings going on at the same time. It's really a kind of a chaotic world, and it's a difficult environment in which to explain our industries. But if we can get them on an off day, when they're not in session, to visit a company, and they get to tour the company, they get to speak, and maybe oftentimes we'll bring several CEOs from different companies into one place, and have the time, and maybe a couple of hours, to talk about the industry, to answer their questions, bring patients in, see how difficult this process is, listen to the entrepreneurs. They start to get it. And so I don't know whether we've done any 535 projects in South Carolina, have we? Anybody know? I don't think so. So my staff is around, and I can be reached at jgreenwood@bio.org. If you'd like to arrange to have a member of Congress visit one of your senators or any of your House members visit your company or companies, let us know, and we'll make it happen.
And we find that as well, right? Once you understand the industry, and some folks are intimidated, right, about what we do. So
Right.
understanding is key. And when they don't understand, increased scrutiny for the life sciences. What do you see as the biggest threats? We mentioned a lot, right? And those opportunities on a global scale for bio.
So there's always intense pressure on pricing globally, and that is because most of the world uses single-payer healthcare system. Single-payer healthcare systems have their advantage over ours in that everyone is covered, but a single-payer system is subject to a budget. So the parliaments of Europe and Asia set a budget. This is what we're going to spend on healthcare this year. And that means they essentially have to ration healthcare, and it also means that they don't have anything like, in most of those places, a free market where we can say this is what our price is going to be until the product goes generic. They say this is what we're willing to pay you. Now, what you'll hear a lot is complaints from the president and others that say, well, it's ridiculous that in Germany or in Canada, the drug costs X, and in the US it costs 3X, We're getting ripped off. Well, the fact of the matter is that our companies will sell products into those markets because they'll still get a margin. It's nowhere near the kind of margin that would be required to sustain this highly risky enterprise, but they're going to take the profit where they can take it. If we come down to their level, if we bring our prices down to European or Canadian levels, the game's over, right? Nobody will invest in us anymore. So we're constantly battling new price pressures all over the world. The other big threat is intellectual property. I understand that if you're a non-governmental organization working on AIDS, or you're working on any number of diseases around the world, and you see people suffering and dying because they can't get access to a drug, that your instinct might be, well, if we crush their patent, then a generic company can come in and make the drug and sell it inexpensively. And that is true. But what it means is, again, no one will go into those markets. We won't sell our products into those markets if they're going to break our patents. And we don't even have to be in the market for them to break a patent, right? They can just do it. And sometimes, frankly, it's subject to corruption, because sometimes generic companies will use undue influence and perhaps financial influence to get policymakers to break a patent for no other reason than the generic company is sitting there and can reap huge profits. Now, our companies have a responsibility to try to make sure that their drugs are affordable in the marketplaces, in the different economies, and they do. And that's why the prices are sometimes very, very low in countries of the developing world. We created a thing at Bio called Bio Ventures for Global Health, looking at the fact that there are many places in the world, in the developing world, where there never will have the money to pay the kind of prices, or even drive innovation for diseases that particularly occur in those countries, infectious diseases. I'm the chairman of that now, and we're doing a thing called African Access Initiative. And what we've done is, believe it or not, more people now die of cancer in Africa than die of malaria. And most places, unless you're wealthy in Africa, if you get cancer, you're dead. You're not going to survive it. And so we went to 5 countries in Africa. We surveyed their hospitals, and we went to each hospital and said, what kind of patients are walking in here with what kind of cancers? What are your capacities to diagnose them, both in terms of personnel and laboratory equipment? What kind of cancers are you seeing? What kind of drugs do those patients need? And how are you doing in terms of getting access to those drugs? And then when we find out that these are the drugs that they can't get access to, we're working with the companies to say, can you negotiate, can we help you negotiate a sustainable price that's not a charity on the part of the company, but will actually get the medicines to the people who need it.
A lot of work to be done. What questions do you all have for Jim? Let's open it up.
Someone in the back there.
Jim, my question is centered around the cost, or the rising costs of the drugs, and you said that pharmaceutical manufacturers are doing their role as far as transparency around those costs. Many of us in this room are self-insured employers, and we represent covering a tremendous amounts of lives, so we're feeling the burden of this rising trend of the cost of medications for our covered lives and their dependents. We feel there's a tremendous lack of transparency at the PBM level, and I heard you say insurance, but I didn't hear you say PBMs. Do you see in your dealings with Congress and the government that there's going to be solutions that are driving transparency at the PBM level, which we feel is the biggest part of the problem?
Yeah, well, it's a very good point, and I agree with you. That does need to happen. So for those of you who don't speak this language, a lot of self-insured companies want to provide health benefits for their employees, including prescription drug benefits. They don't have the expertise to go out and negotiate the prices of those drugs with each and every company, of course. So they hire a pharmaceutical benefits manager, a PBM. And in theory, and initially, this is a good idea. You have somebody who has expertise that can go in and negotiate with all of the drug companies, Pfizer, GSK, Merck, all down the line, and say, I represent, and these PBMs will represent not one employer, but represent hundreds of employees, so they may have, and there are only about 3 or 4 major PBMs in the whole country right now. And so each of them represents millions and millions of covered employees. So initially the idea was they'll negotiate prices, And that's basically a free market exchange. What are you willing to sell your drug for? And if you have a competitor, I'll go to your competitor and see if I can get a better price over there. It makes all the sense in the world. It's the way this should work. What they evolved into was, let's see, I've got 30 million people here, and I may or may not put your drug on the formulary so that you can sell it to all of these employees. But if you make the price X and then you pay me Y, and I keep that money, then I'll put your drug on the formulary. And by the way, if you don't do that, I won't put any of your drugs on the formulary, all right? So if you look at the Forbes 10 biggest, richest companies in terms of annual revenue, right? There are two PBMs, and a distributor, drug distributor on that list. Up there with ExxonMobil and Apple and Amazon, right? So when you think about what they're contributing in terms of value to the healthcare system versus the money that they're taking out of the system, and to the transparency issue, it's all done in secret, right? So the PBMs, nobody knows, it's not an open competitive market. So I think that there needs to be tremendous reform in that regard. The Trump administration has talked about it, but we're still waiting to see what they're going to do.
Time for one more.
Hi, Jim. I have a two-part question, and my first part is two parts. Having been in this industry for a very long time now, and having worked for coverage and reimbursement on the insurance side, I've seen where, indeed, the costs have shifted more. When I started, most of the cost that a patient had, both for drugs, devices, and all care, went to the bottom line for the insurance company. And there was a lack of insight and care by the patient because they didn't recognize all the costs that were involved. It was just a case of you're going to take care of all of this. So we've had a shifting of those costs over the years. And so you suggested that there needed to be more, what is the word I'm looking for? More support from the insurance industry so that they, it sounds like, takes back some of the cost of this. How do you propose doing it that is equitable on both sides of the business?
Mm-hmm. So first off, it's not easy because what you would really have to do is mandate at the state or federal level what insurers can do when it comes to the requirements for out-of-pocket. California did this. California passed a law recently that said insurers who provide prescription drug benefits can only make patients pay $250 per month cap out of pocket per prescription. And of course, the insurance companies railed against that, and they screamed that it would raise premiums. Number one, it didn't. So when they set their premiums next year, the people who do that for them said it's eraser dust. We don't even notice anything. So insurance is unlikely to go up. But even if you could mandate across the whole system that there were limits on what patients had to pay out of pocket for prescription drugs, and even if premiums did go up, they would only go up a little. But isn't that what insurance is about? I mean, insurance is supposed to say, you pay and pay and pay, but when you get sick, and you got cancer, and you have big expenses, that's where we come in and we protect you from that, and we make sure you get that. And that's not the way the system is working now. The system is working now in such a way that it's the sickest people who get stuck with the biggest bills. And it doesn't make sense.
And the second part of that
part
question.
two of part one?
B is coming up off part one. The VA has been able to negotiate rates with pharmaceutical companies. And there's been, of course, a lot of questions about Medicare being able to do it in their legislation forbidding or restricting them doing it. Have you all talked about this or thought about considering going back to the table with Medicare so they can better negotiate prices as the VA does with the pharmaceutical system?
Right. So a couple of things. I know we're over time. A couple of things. First off, the reason that the VA system, Veterans Administration, can do that is because they actually acquire the drugs. They buy the drugs by tractor-trailer load, and they distribute them out into the hospitals. So they're negotiating directly with the manufacturers and the distributors on the prices. The Medicare system doesn't work that way. The Medicare system is such that taxpayers subsidize the premiums of the beneficiary, and the insurance companies negotiate with the drug makers. And all of the same people who negotiate the prices that your health insurance is willing to pay for your prescriptions are the same people who are negotiating in Medicare. And in fact, in many instances, in fact, most instances, drugs in the Medicare Part D program are lower priced than outside of it. So the negotiating system is already working. And so it's been this canard since we created this system, that if you just gave the Secretary of Health and Human Services the ability to negotiate all these prices, they would go down. The only way that would happen is if they also could say, well, we're not going to cover some of these drugs, and then you're taking access away from the patients. So that's not the answer to the question. The answer to the question, I still think in Part D, is to reduce the out-of-pocket cost for the patient.
Thank you. Well, Jim, thank you for taking time with us
My
today.
pleasure.
We're
Thank
happy
you.
to be a part of Bio and all that you're doing and the work on behalf of all of us. So thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Please join us in thanking Jim.